The earth was still that afternoon. The only sound in the village square was the muffled cries coming from beneath the pile of fresh red soil. Her fingers, thin, trembling and covered in dust, scratched weakly at the ground, but the elders turned their faces away. The village chief, Okonkwo-Eze, stood tall in his red-feathered cap, pointing his staff at the mound. "She stole the sacred yam meant for the harvest festival," he declared. "The gods will accept this sacrifice." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared speak. The girl, barely 16, had been poor all her life, the daughter of a widow who could hardly feed her. Now she was fighting for air beneath the earth. Thunder rolled far in the distance. The sky, moments ago blue, began to darken unnaturally. A wind rose, whistling through the palm fronds as if it carried voices. Somewhere beyond the hills, the ancient drums began to beat on their own. The old women gasped and whispered, "The ancestors, they are angry." Okeene Village was the kind of place where every face was familiar and every story was known. Nestled between green hills and the winding Oji River, it thrived on farming and fishing. At sunrise, women could be heard pounding yam in mortars while children fetched water from the stream. Men tilled the land, their hoes digging into the rich soil that had fed generations. Life was ruled by customs. Festivals honored the seasons, and elders settled disputes under the giant iroko tree in the village square. Above all, the people feared and respected the gods and their ancestors. Every home had a small clay shrine, and no one dared break a taboo. Among the villagers was a young girl named Adiz. She lived with her mother, Neka, in a mud hut at the far edge of the village, close to the forest path. Her father had died when she was 5, crushed by a falling palm tree during a storm. Since then, Neka had sold firewood in the market, but it was never enough. Many nights, Adiz went to bed hungry. Despite the hardship, Adiz was known for her gentle heart. She would help the old women carry water, play with the younger children, and share the little food she had. Her smile was like the morning sun, bright but fragile. One hot afternoon, as the dry season neared its end, the air in Okeene felt tense. The harvest festival was only 2 weeks away, and the yam barns were full. The biggest and best yam was chosen each year for the sacred offering to Ani, the earth goddess. It was believed that if this yam was stolen, the land would become cursed. The yam was kept in the chief's barn, guarded day and night. But on that fateful morning, word spread like wildfire. The sacred yam was missing. The news caused panic. Some feared a rival village had stolen it to curse them. Others whispered about spirits playing tricks. The elders gathered quickly under the iroko tree, and Chief Okonkwo-Eze swore that the thief would face a punishment so severe that no one would ever dare offend the gods again. The search began. Every home was checked, and whispers grew louder. That was when someone claimed they saw Adiz near the chief's barn the night before. Neka cried out in protest, "My daughter would never," but her voice was drowned by angry murmurs. By evening, the chief's guards came to their hut. They pushed aside the cooking pot, searched the corners, and then, to the shock of everyone, pulled out a large yam wrapped in a cloth. Adiz stared at it, confused, her eyes filling with tears. "I swear I did not take it," she pleaded. But the chief's voice was like iron. "The gods have shown us the thief." The villagers gathered in the square, watching as the chief raised his staff. "Before the sun sets tomorrow, this girl will pay for her crime." That night, Adiz sat in the small hut, her mother holding her tight, whispering prayers. But both of them knew, once the chief spoke, no one dared challenge him. The next morning the sky was pale, the air heavy. Adiz was led to the edge of the village, where a pit had been dug. People stood in silence, some looking away, others watching with cold eyes. The chief's words were sharp. "The earth goddess will take back what was stolen." The guards began to lower Adiz into the hole. She glanced around desperately, her eyes meeting those of the few villagers who still believed she was innocent. But fear kept them frozen. The first shovels of dirt fell on her feet, then her knees, her chest. The world grew darker with every breath as soil filled her mouth. Somewhere in the distance, the wind shifted. The leaves rustled without reason, and the sound of old drums echoed faintly from beyond the hills, drums that no living drummer played anymore. And then, the ground shook. The tremor was small at first, just enough to make the wooden water gourds in the nearby huts rattle. But then it grew stronger. The villagers looked around wide-eyed, some stepping back from the burial pit. "Hold her down," Chief Okonkwo barked, though his voice cracked ever so slightly. The guards obeyed, their hands pressing Adi's thin shoulders into the soil. But the ground beneath them seemed to sigh, long and deep, like an ancient giant waking from sleep. Dark clouds rolled in faster than any storm they had ever seen. A cold wind whipped through the clearing, and somewhere above, lightning flashed without thunder. The village priest, Dibia Chaik, who had been watching silently, took a step forward. His cowrie-beaded staff trembled in his grip. "Chief, this is no ordinary wind," he said in a low voice. "The ancestors are restless." Okonkwo shot him a hard glare. "She has offended the gods. The ancestors will thank us when the earth swallows her." But even as he spoke, a loud crack rang out from the old Iroko tree at the edge of the square. Its branches shook violently though no one had touched it. Some women screamed. Child began to cry. Neka broke through the crowd and fell to her knees beside the pit. "Please. My daughter is innocent. This is not justice. This is wickedness." The chief's guards grabbed her by the arms, dragging her back as she kicked and screamed. Adi's voice was now a faint, choked sound from beneath the soil. It was then that something even stranger happened. The sacred yam itself rolled into the square. No one had touched it. No one had carried it. It simply tumbled forward, as though pushed by unseen hands, and came to rest right in front of the chief's feet. A hush fell over the crowd. All eyes were on the yam. Dibia Chaik's face grew pale. "The yam. It returns itself." He turned to the chief slowly. "This is a sign, Okonkwo. A terrible sign." The chief hesitated for the first time, but pride was a heavy stone in his chest. He would not admit he might have been wrong in front of the whole village. He raised his staff again, ready to give the order to finish the burial. The drums from the hills grew louder. The ground shook again, this time so hard that the chief staggered. A voice, deep and heavy like rolling thunder, seemed to rise from beneath the earth itself. It was not a voice of the living. "Oh, bulls. Innocent blood." Villagers fell to their knees, some covering their ears. Neka screamed Adi's name. Chief froze. For the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. But it was too late. Adi's last breath was slipping away. And then, something in the soil moved. The soil at the pit's edge began to bulge and shift, as if it were breathing. Gasps rose from the crowd. The guards stepped back, dropping their shovels. A pale hand, caked with dirt, broke through the surface. Fingers clawed at the air, desperate for life. The villagers cried out, some in horror, others in awe. Neka fell to the ground, scrambling to the edge of the pit. "Adiz, hold on, my child," she screamed, her voice breaking. Before anyone could move, a strange wind swirled over the pit, lifting loose dust into the air. Shapes began to form in the haze. Shadowy figures, tall and robed, their eyes glowing faintly like embers. The villagers whispered in fear. "The ancestors." One stepped forward, his voice deep and cold. "The earth drinks only the blood of the guilty. You have wronged the innocent." Chief Okonkwo's knees wavered, but his pride still chained his tongue. "She stole the sacred yam. It was my duty to punish her." The ancestors' eyes blazed brighter. "The yam was taken by deceit, not by her hand. Yet you buried her to feed your own pride." The crowd turned to one another in shock, murmurs and accusations spreading like wildfire. Could it be that the chief himself had plotted this? Neka clawed at the soil, pulling it away from her daughter's face. Adiz coughed violently, her eyes fluttering open. Tears streamed down her dirt-streaked cheeks. But before mother and daughter could embrace, the earth beneath the chief cracked open. A thin fissure snaked toward his feet, and a sound like distant wailing rose from it. Dibia Chaik dropped to his knees. Okonkwo, confess before the ancestors' anger consumes us all. The chief's jaw tightened. I have nothing to confess, he said, but his voice trembled. The wind grew colder. The other ancestor spirits began to circle the pit, their shadows stretching unnaturally across the ground. Suddenly, the sacred yam at the chief's feet began to rot before everyone's eyes, its skin blackening, its flesh oozing foul-smelling liquid. The stench made people gag. This, the lead ancestor said, pointing at the yam, is the corruption of a lying heart. Then his gaze shifted to the villagers. If you do not right this wrong, the curse will fall on all of you. The crowd recoiled. Mothers pulled their children close. Farmers muttered in fear about failed crops and sick animals. The chief took a step back, but the earth beneath his heel gave way slightly, making him stumble. And then, the ancestor pointed directly at him. You know the true thief. The village square went silent, everyone holding their breath. The chief's face darkened, his jaw clenching so tight that the veins in his neck stood out. He scanned the crowd as if daring anyone to speak. But the silence was heavy, thick with the weight of fear. The ancestor spirit stepped closer, his voice like the rumble of distant thunder. Speak the truth, Okonkwo Ease, or the ground will open and swallow you whole. The chief's eyes darted to the far corner of the crowd, where his eldest son, Obinna, stood. The boy's face was pale, his hands trembling. The villagers followed his gaze. A murmur began. Obinna! Obinna swallowed hard. Father, I... Silence! Okonkwo roared, but his voice cracked under the strain. The ancestors' ember-like eyes burned brighter. Let him speak. Obinna's lips quivered. It was me. I took the yam. The crowd gasped. I was playing with my friends near the barn and saw it lying outside the gate. I thought if I gave it to father he would be proud of me. I didn't know it was the sacred yam until it was too late. He turned to Adiz, shame flooding his voice. When they found it in your home, I stayed quiet because I was afraid father would be angry. I'm sorry. The crowd erupted in outrage. Old women spat on the ground, and men shook their heads in disgust. Chief Okonkwo's face twisted with fury, not at the confession but at the humiliation. You stupid boy. Do you know what you've done? But before he could say more, the lead ancestor raised his hand, and the wind howled through the square. You let pride blind you, Okonkwo. You would bury the innocent to protect your name, even at the cost of the village's blessing. The ground trembled again, this time cracking wider under the chief's feet. He stumbled backward, grabbing at the air as if trying to hold on to the life he once commanded. Neka had pulled Adiz completely free from the pit now. The girl clung to her mother, coughing, her small body shaking from the cold. Some villagers stepped forward, putting themselves between Adiz and the chief. The ancestor's voice rolled like a storm. The harm you caused will not be erased by words. The earth demands balance. The ancestors demand justice. Okonkwo's eyes darted wildly. You cannot touch me. I am the chief of Okeani. The ancestor's tone was like ice. You were the chief, but you are no longer fit to lead. Gasps filled the air. This was no ordinary shame. Being stripped of the title by the ancestors meant one's name would be cursed for generations. The chief staggered back again as the crack in the earth widened. And then, with a sound like a drumbeat deep underground, the soil gave way completely beneath him. His body dropped halfway into the darkness before he managed to cling to the edge with one hand. His face was twisted with terror now, his voice a trembling whisper. Help me, please. But no one moved. The wind stilled for a moment, and then the ancestor looked directly at Adiz. Child, the choice is yours. Every eye in the village turned to her. Adiz's breath caught in her throat. She had just been pulled from the very grave the chief ordered for her. And now, the ancestors were asking her to decide his fate. The crowd was silent except for the crackling of the wind through the iroko leaves. Neka's hand squeezed her daughter's shoulder. "My child," she whispered, "remember who you are." Adi's eyes filled with tears. She thought of the mornings she had gone hungry while the chief's family feasted. She thought of the laughter of children when they mocked her torn clothes. She thought of the way Okonkwo's voice had been like stone as he ordered the dirt thrown over her head. And yet, she also thought of the stories her late father used to tell. How mercy could turn an enemy into an ally. How the ancestors blessed those who chose the higher path. The chief's voice trembled from the pit's edge. "Adis, please. I was wrong. Spare me." It was the first time anyone had heard him beg. The lead ancestor stepped closer, his glowing eyes fixed on her. "To show mercy is strength. To show justice is wisdom. You may choose one, but you cannot have both." The choice burned in Adi's chest. She looked at the villagers, some nodding for her to show mercy, others gesturing for her to let him fall. Her lips parted. "I." But before she could speak, the air in the square thickened. The other ancestor spirits began to chant in a language long forgotten. The ground rumbled beneath her feet, and she saw something in the crack below the chief. A pale, endless darkness and the faint sound of weeping. Her heart pounded. Was that the place where liars and oath-breakers went after death? Okonkwo's grip was slipping. His face was slick with sweat. His eyes wild with fear. "Please, Adis. I have children. I have a family." Something in his voice made her pause. Not guilt, not sorrow, but fear of losing his power. Adis took a deep breath. "If I let you live, you will never harm another innocent again. You will step down as chief, and you will confess your wrong before all the people." Okonkwo's jaw tightened. His pride flared even now, but the yawning darkness below reminded him of the cost. I agree." The ancestor spirit's voice boomed. "If you go back on your word, the earth will take you before your next breath." A sudden gust of wind lifted Adi's hair as she reached out her hand. The chief hesitated, then grasped it. The ground beneath him solidified as she pulled him up, his body trembling. But as soon as his feet touched the soil, the sacred yam, still rotting, crumbled into dust at his feet. The villagers gasped. Dibia Chaik's voice was low but heavy. "The blessing of the land is still gone. The ancestors will not restore it until the harm is mended in full." The lead ancestor turned to Adis. "The yam was only the surface of the wound. To heal it, you must journey beyond the hills to where the river of truth flows. There you will find what can restore balance." The wind swirled one last time, and the ancestors faded into the dust. The villagers began to murmur. Some feared the task was too dangerous. No one had crossed the hills in decades. But Adis, weak as she was, stood straighter. "I will go," she said, "for my people and for the blessing of our land." Her mother's face was pale, but her eyes were proud. "Then we prepare, my child. The journey will test you in ways you cannot yet see." And as the first stars blinked into the sky, Adis knew. Her true trial was only beginning. The morning of Adis' departure, the whole village gathered at the square. Even those who had once turned away from her now stood quietly, guilt written on their faces. Neka tied a small bundle of food, cassava bread, dried fish, and a gourd of water, onto her daughter's back. She placed a cowrie shell in Adis' palm. "This belonged to your father," she said softly. "Keep it close. It will guide you when the road grows dark." Dibia Chaik stepped forward, leaning heavily on his staff. "The path beyond the hills is not like our farmland. You will meet creatures that do not walk in daylight and hear voices that are not of the living. Remember the ancestors' charge. Seek the river of truth, and do not drink from it until it speaks to you." Some elders muttered about sending guards with her, but Adis shook her head. "This is a path I must walk alone." With a final embrace from her mother, she turned toward the forest path. The morning sun was warm on her back, But as she entered the thick trees, the light dimmed. The first day was uneventful, save for the sound of rustling leaves and the occasional cry of a distant bird. But as evening approached, a strange mist began to curl between the trunks. Adiz quickened her pace, knowing she needed to find shelter before nightfall. She found a small clearing with an abandoned hunter's hut. It smelled faintly of smoke and herbs. She settled inside, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. Just as she began to drift into sleep, she heard it, whispers. Faint at first, then growing clearer. Adiz. Adiz. She sat up sharply, scanning the darkness. The whispers seemed to come from all directions, like voices carried by the mist. Then from the doorway a figure appeared, a young woman with eyes like pools of black water and a smile that didn't reach her cheeks. "You're far from home, child," the stranger said. Her voice was sweet, almost too sweet. "The river of truth is dangerous. But I can show you a quicker way, for a price." Adiz's hand tightened around the cowrie shell in her palm. "What price?" The woman's smile widened. "Your voice. Give it to me, and you will not have to cross the dark marsh where the river hides." Adiz's heart pounded. Without her voice, how could she speak to the river when she found it? She shook her head. "No, I will find my own way." The woman's smile faltered. Her eyes glinted with something sharp. "Foolish child. The marsh will swallow you whole. Remember my offer when you are sinking." And with that, she stepped back into the mist and was gone. The next morning, Adiz continued her journey, but the trees grew stranger the further she went, some with twisted branches like reaching hands, others with roots that seemed to pulse faintly beneath the ground. By midday, she reached the edge of the dark marsh. Thick black water stretched before her, dotted with patches of reeds that swayed though there was no wind. Somewhere far off, she heard the croak of a frog, or perhaps something pretending to be one. She stepped onto the first patch of firm ground, testing it with her bare foot. Held. She took another step, then another. Halfway across, a bubbling sound came from beneath her. The ground gave way suddenly, and she sank to her knees in the cold, sucking mud. The whispers returned, this time louder, urgent. "You will sink. Give me your voice, and I will save you." It was the same woman's voice from the night before. Adiz's breath came fast. The mud was rising to her waist now. Her father's cowrie shell felt warm in her hand, almost pulsing like a heartbeat. She knew she had to choose: call out for help and risk the marsh swallowing her voice forever, or trust that the shell might show her another way. Her fingers tightened around it. "Ancestors, guide me," she whispered. And then, the water directly in front of her began to glow. The glow in the water was faint at first, like moonlight breaking through deep clouds. Then it spread in a thin, twisting line, leading further across the marsh. Adiz stared at it, unsure if it was a trap or a blessing. The whispers hissed again in her ear. "Foolish child, you will drown." But Adiz ignored them. She clutched the warm cowrie shell and took a step toward the glowing path. To her surprise, the mud beneath her feet firmed, enough for her to pull herself free from the sucking grip. She took another step, then another, following the faint light. The marsh gurgled angrily, bubbles rising around her as if unseen hands tried to drag her down. Yet wherever the light touched, the water stilled, and the reeds bowed as though in respect. After what felt like hours, Adiz stepped onto dry land again. She collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. The cowrie in her hand was still warm, as though her father's spirit had been walking beside her. But there was no time to rest. Ahead, she saw a narrow path winding between two massive boulders. The air grew cooler as she passed through, and she heard it, the sound of running water. Her heart quickened. Could it be the river of truth? The path opened into a small valley where a crystal-clear river wound its way through wildflowers. The water shimmered strangely, almost as if tiny stars floated beneath the surface. She approached the bank and knelt. The river's voice came softly, like a song sung from far away. "Child who has suffered unjustly, why have you come?" Adiz's eyes stung with tears. The land has been cursed. I was blamed for a crime I did not commit. The ancestors sent me to find you, so our village can be blessed again. The river's voice grew deeper, echoing from all around her. The blessing is not mine to give. It must be claimed by truth alone. Are you willing to pay the price? Adi's hands trembled. What is the price? The river swirled, and in its depths, shapes began to form, memories from her life. She saw her father's smile, her mother's tired hands, the day she had been accused and buried alive. The river's voice spoke again. You must drink from me, but know this. The truth will not only expose your enemies. It will expose all, even the parts of yourself you hide. Once drunk, the truth cannot be undone. Adiz hesitated. If she drank, the whole village would see everything. Her moments of anger, her jealous thoughts, her hidden fears. But if she refused, her people would remain cursed. She closed her eyes, remembering the faces of the children in the village, the farmers who depended on the land. She lifted the cowrie shell, scooped the shimmering water, and drank. The taste was unlike anything she'd known. Sweet like ripe mango, bitter like kola nut, and warm like palm wine. It spread through her body, and suddenly, she felt as if she were floating above herself. She saw the village square, the chief's fearful eyes, the sacred yam in Obina's hands. She saw how the chief had ordered it hidden in her hut, and how the villagers had turned away not because they believed she was guilty, but because they were afraid to face the truth. And then she saw something else. A darkness lingering over the chief's household, a debt to the ancestors that had been unpaid for generations. The river's voice returned. You now hold the full truth. Return to your people and speak it before them. Only then will the curse lift. The water stilled, the glowing stars within it fading. Adiz stood, her heart heavy but her resolve stronger than ever. She turned back toward the path through the boulders, knowing what she had to do. But as she reached the edge of the marsh, the woman with black water eyes appeared again, blocking her way. You should have taken my offer, she hissed. Now you will not make it back alive. Adiz's grip tightened around the cowrie shell. The woman's black water eyes glimmered with malice. Her smile stretched wide like a shadow that had learned to imitate a human face. You've walked far, the woman said, stepping closer. But the journey ends here. Give me the truth you carry, and I might let you live. Adiz's voice was steady. The truth is not mine to give. It belongs to the ancestors, and it belongs to my people. The woman's face twisted. Then you will belong to the marsh. She raised her hand, and the reeds around them began to writhe like snakes. The ground softened under Adiz's feet, the sucking mud trying to drag her down again. Adiz closed her eyes and pressed the cowrie shell to her chest. Father, ancestors, stand with me. A sudden gust of wind swept through the marsh, carrying the scent of rain and wood smoke. The ground beneath Adiz hardened. Around her, ghostly shapes formed, the same ancestor spirits who had risen in the village square. The lead ancestor stepped forward, his ember eyes fixed on the woman. You have no claim here, spirit of deceit. Return to the darkness from which you came. The woman hissed like boiling water. Her form rippled, as if her body was made of the marsh water itself. Then, with a scream that echoed through the hills, she dissolved into mist, vanishing into the reeds. Path home cleared. The ancestors' voices whispered in the wind. Go, child. It is time. By the time Adiz reached Okeani, the sun was setting. The villagers gathered in the square, their faces a mix of guilt and curiosity. The chief stood among them, his red cap gone, his posture stiff but uncertain. Adiz stepped into the center and raised the cowrie shell high. The river of truth has spoken, she said, her voice carrying across the square. She told them everything. How the yam had truly been taken, how it had been hidden in her home, how the chief had chosen his pride over justice. And she spoke not only of their wrongs against her, but of her own moments of anger and resentment. The truth hung in the air like a heavy rain cloud. No one could meet her eyes at first. Then, one by one, people began to step forward. They confessed to small lies, grudges, and betrayals they had hidden for years. The square became a place of cleansing, the weight of silence lifting from their hearts. The ground beneath them seemed to breathe in relief. A cool wind swept through the village, and the scent of fresh earth filled the air. Far away, the yam barns creaked, and when they opened them, the yams inside were fresh and whole again. The curse was gone. The elders stripped Okonkwo of his title that very night. For the first time in living memory, the village chose a leader not from bloodline, but from character. They chose Dibia Chaik, the priest who had spoken for truth. As for Adiz, she returned to her mother's hut. People who had once turned away from her now greeted her with respect. Children followed her to the market, asking her to tell the story of her journey. In the evenings, she would sit by the fire, turning the cowrie shell in her hand. She knew the lesson was greater than what had happened to her. The ancestors had not only punished the unjust, they had shown that truth, though painful, was the only path to peace. And so, the story of Adiz became a warning passed down in Okeene. If you bury the innocent, the earth will remember. And when the ancestors rise, they will rise for truth.